Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Hey, a manufactured crisis at the border. I'm Brian Stelter, and this is Reliable Sources, our weekly look at the story behind the story, of how the media really works and how the news gets made. This hour, a trio of newsmakers are here, including the top editor of the New York Times, Dean Baquet. Lots to ask him. Plus, the growing uproar inside Sinclair's TV station over propagandistic promos. I'll talk with one former employee who's blowing the whistle on the local news giant. And later, one of the week's hottest topics, are conservative columnists really being silenced? Eric Erickson will join me live. But first, the story that symbolizes everything that's wrong with the Trump era. President Trump receives faulty information, then he makes impulsive decisions, and his staff has to scramble. Ask yourself, why is there so much talk about the U.S.-Mexico border all of a sudden? Why are National Guard troops suddenly being deployed? Well, the answer involves President Trump's favorite channel. So let's try to slow down time for a minute. Let's look at the timeline from the past week to really understand what happened here. Because the line where Fox News ends and where Trump begins is getting blurrier by the day. You have to see this timeline to believe it. And I think it starts right here. About a week ago, the president dining with Sean Hannity last weekend at Mar-a-Lago. The entire week of talk about immigration, including the actions at the border, seemed to be a result of the dinner that he had at Mar-a-Lago and all the other conversations the president's having with right-wing media voices that are disappointed in him. Disappointed in the omnibus spending bill, disappointed in lack of border wall construction. We've heard Ann Coulter and others talking about this. But then there was this article that originally appeared in BuzzFeed, an article that created the propulsion for a story about Caravan. Of course, this is the Caravan we've seen. Now, lots of news outlets are covering this caravan of Central Americans, some of whom are trying to head to the United States. Last Sunday morning, someone over at Fox and Friends spotted the BuzzFeed story and then ran with it big time. Watch.
An army of migrants marching to America, and a BuzzFeed reporter is in that march with them.
Okay, so here's the kicker. Did you see the time on screen? Let's zoom in on the time. We've highlighted it here. This was around 6:30 in the morning Eastern time. Just 20 minutes later, the president tweeted that the border is getting more dangerous and that caravans, plural, are heading to the U.S. This feedback loop continued for days. It ping-ponged back to Fox. Fox went full steam ahead with border control coverage in primetime on Monday.
Would it be possible to send the military to our border? I mean, why is this not, honestly, why is this not a hostile act against our country?
You know what? The president's instincts are correct. No more. Build the wall, militarize our southern border, and then we can have a discussion on this. The Democrats had their chance.
Military. I wonder where the president got that idea, because the next day, this is what he said.
Until we can have a wall and proper security, we're going to be guarding our border with the military. So we are preparing for the military to secure our border between Mexico and the United States.
And we've seen the rest. There are now deployments happening at the southern border, more in the days to come. It seems that the Department of Homeland Security and other agencies are scrambling to catch up to what the president said on Tuesday. I say this is a symbol of everything that's wrong with the Trump era. A lack of quality information, first of all, reaching the president. He's relying instead on his Fox friends, sometimes via TV, sometimes on the phone, sometimes in person. Now, his addiction to Fox and to other pro-Trump commentators leads to impulsive actions. In this case, he's definitely playing to his base, stoking anti-immigrant fears, and even catching his staff off guard. Then they have to scramble to make it look like he knows what he's doing. That is how we end up with the National Guard deployed to the border in what I would argue is a PR stunt. Trump wants a PR victory. He wants to give his Fox friends something to celebrate. And as a result, we're all talking about the border, a manufactured crisis. Joining me now to talk about it, Olivia Nuzzi, Washington correspondent for New York Magazine, and political analyst Jeff Greenfield. Jeff, am I wrong about this being what's so wrong about the Trump era?
I think I would add a layer of maybe complexity. Remember that Trump's belief about immigration Trump's belief about foreigners taking advantage of us and ripping us off and, killing our buffalo or whatever he's into. That is at the core of Trump's world set of beliefs. He's believed this for 30 years. So it's not just that Fox and friends are sending out false information about anything in particular. They're hitting the note that most is likely to get Trump riled up. The second question, and I mean this as a question, is, there are a lot of people on Fox who wouldn't come near this. Shep Smith, Chris Wallace, Brett Baer. So it's not just that he's listening to Fox. He's listening to the very source of misinformation that comes unmediated. It's not as though any of those Fox and Friends people are like journalists who might check out what they're saying. So they are regurgitating completely unverified information to exactly the right or wrong person to respond to it viscerally.
Yeah, Olivia, it's not as if Shep Smith or Brett Baer sent crews to the border, or sent crew, not to the border. Fox News' newsroom could have sent reporters to the Caravan and found out what's really going on. But instead, they rip off a BuzzFeed story, they misinterpret it, they make it sound really scary, and then we see days and days and days of coverage.
Right. Well, the tragedy of this is the way that they misinterpreted that story. I think that headline on WMIC this week on the media, there was an episode specifically about this.
It's not every week that a protest creates an international incident. But here we are.
The Pentagon is now preparing options after President Trump signed a proclamation directing the National Guard to be deployed to the U.S.-Mexican border.
The move to mobilize came after several days of tweets in which the president focused his rage on a group of Central American migrants who have gathered to travel through Mexico. Many are seeking asylum there. Some are planning to seek asylum in the United States, and a few are planning to cross the border illegally.
Now, the Caravan, which is over 1,000 people coming in from Honduras, thought they were going to just walk right through Mexico and right through the border.
On Thursday, after 5 days of tweeting about it, Trump said the Caravan was largely broken up.
No, it's not.
Carrie Kahn is NPR's correspondent for Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean.
I spent all day Wednesday with them, and there are hundreds of men, women, and a lot of children, many sick now, if I can add that, in this park. It's a recreational field with soccer fields and a couple, swing sets and stuff, in this small town in southern Oaxaca state. And they're still there, and they're united front, and they're going to continue traveling north. Just how far north together this group will travel is very much unclear and in flux.
So, the group's still together. Earlier this week, the president said that Mexico was not doing enough. On Thursday, he declared that Mexico's government was in control. Its strong immigration laws, better than ours, he said, had stalled the Caravan.
No, the strong Mexican migration laws did not break it up either. Mexico does not have strong migration laws. It has porous borders, underfunded resources, and they're unable to deal with this group of migrants, too, because every year tens of thousands of Central Americans trek through Mexico on their way to the U.S. border.
This week, Trump also returned to a theme of his campaign, that immigrants from the South prominently featured rapists.
And remember my opening remarks at Trump Tower when I opened. Everybody said, oh, he was so tough. And I used the word rape. And yesterday it came out where this journey coming up, women are raped at levels that nobody's ever seen before.
Migrant on migrant crime, no. And this group is incredibly united to stay together as a group and to provide safety for a lot of the women and the children that are traveling alone.
Trump also was demonstrably wrong in depicting the so-called Caravan as somehow unusual, a threat to national security.
Well, first of all, the word caravan is sort of a misnomer. And I think that the word that they used to describe this is I've had a hard time to translate it and find a proper translation. It's called Via Crucis.
Atentamente, Caravana 2018, Via Crucis, migrantes en la lucha, pueblos sin fronteras.
And it's sort of a religious pilgrimage, hinted sort of way, and I think in the translation it sounds like everybody's in these cars when you think of caravan. No, it's not. It's just a group of people that have come together. Mexico has a long tradition of pilgrimages and long marches.
This particular caravan started in Tapachula, Mexico, just across the river from Guatemala, where many migrants from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador wait in shelters to make the journey north.
It wasn't that they all came en masse from Central America. I think that's very important to point out. And they're traveling on their own. They get to Tapachula, Mexico. The caravan organizers say, hey, come with us. Let's all travel in a big group. And people want to do that. I heard from people, especially the women traveling on their own with children, that they feel safer.
There are many so-called caravans in Mexico, some lasting only a few hours. Their purpose is twofold. First, there's safety in numbers, safety from gang violence and robbery, and safety from immigration officers and corrupt government officials. But it's also a form of activism, making those who are invisible visible. One of the best-known caravans is an annual 4,000-kilometer trip by a group of mothers whose migrant sons and daughters have disappeared. Alberto Xicotencatl is the director of Migrant House, a shelter in Saltillo in northern Mexico.
Ellas muestran fotografías de sus hijos desaparecidos.
They show photos of their disappeared children. They meet with officials and they demand a search for the disappeared and protections for migrants, because if there were protections, their children wouldn't have disappeared. They wouldn't have had to move around in the shadows hiding.
Xicotencatl says that Migrant House doesn't organize these group journeys because they can't guarantee the traveler's safety. But Pueblos Sin Fronteras, People Without Borders, who organized this week's trek, has done several. Alex Mensing is a project coordinator.
Last year, Pueblos Sin Fronteras helped coordinate 2 caravans in which asylum seekers traveled all the way from the southern Mexico border to the northern Mexico border, where they presented themselves at an official port of entry, turned themselves into U.S. immigration authorities, and requested asylum.
So how did this particular caravan come to the attention of Trump? The path is as well-worn as the Stations of the Cross. First, BuzzFeed ran a story with the unfortunate headline, "A huge caravan of Central Americans is headed for the U.S., and no one in Mexico dares to stop them." Breitbart and then other right-wing sites soon picked it up. Then, as usual, it got to Fox and Friends. Mensing says it was probably the BuzzFeed headline that hooked them.
Yeah, I do think that the way the headline of the BuzzFeed article, the first one that came out, was written, galvanized the right more than it galvanized the left.
We talked about this this group of migrants, 1,200, marching to America, and the BuzzFeed reporter that's going along with them reporting on it. They're marching to the U.S. border because they want in and they want to make a statement with a reporter touting what they're doing.
And less than an hour later...
Well, President Trump on an anti-immigrant rant on Easter Sunday, much of it on Twitter. Here are the tweets. Border Patrol agents are not allowed to properly do their job at the border. Getting more dangerous. Caravans coming. Republicans must go to nuclear option to pass tough laws now. No more DACA deal.
Tucker Carlson, meanwhile, took the opportunity to express disapproval at an activist who blamed U.S. policy for the event.
So our sins are the reason this is. So you hate America, is what you're saying. I don't know why. Actually, it's interesting. You're blaming America for illegal immigration into America.
The coverage and rhetoric has gotten so intense that even Brandon Darby, who covers immigration for Breitbart, tweeted, quote, "I'm seeing a lot of right-wing media cover this as people coming illegally or as illegal aliens. That is incorrect. They are coming to a port of entry and requesting refugee status. That is legal." And he elaborated on Breitbart News Tonight with a pointed, if peculiar, simile.
The organizers of this group are actually pulling something similar to what Dr. Kevorkian did. This is something that happens all the time, just like assisted suicide, when it comes to overdosing people on giving them too much morphine and they slowly pass away. This happened all the time, but then came Dr. Kevorkian and put it in everyone's face, and then all of a sudden there's legislation and people looking at the issue. And so this group, People Without Borders, is actually doing a favor to the right, they're shooting themselves in the foot because it's something that happens all the time. And by highlighting it as they're doing it, it's only going to highlight the need for congressional action on this issue.
This caravan was much larger than the organizers were expecting, and they can't continue on the route as planned. But if the goal was to shine a light on what migrants are experiencing and the conditions in Honduras forcing them to flee, then Mensing considers the news coverage a win. NPR's Carrie Kahn says that if that was the goal, the media in large part haven't done their part.
The vast number of those people in that group are suffering from incredible levels of violence and incredible levels of just difficult situation in their countries that we have not really talked about much in the press.
She said she stopped to talk to a woman sitting by a stream.
She was actually putting on makeup, trying to make the best of a terrible situation. She was with her two daughters, one's 15 and one's 11. They live in Honduras. And her daughter, 15-year-old, was kidnapped by gang members for 2 days and gang raped. This happened 4 months ago, and her daughter is just traumatized. And then when she tried to do something about it, she was confronted by the gang and threatened with her life, and she didn't know what to do.
She says she'll probably try and seek asylum in Mexico. Meanwhile, Mensing and other organizers have gotten death threats, and he thinks it's because of the hysterical coverage generated north of the border. Now they're rethinking future projects.
It's definitely a factor in deciding to not try to do a large public event at the border, even if that large public event, as there were last year, is designed to highlight a completely legal access to asylum.
And Alberto Xicotencatl of Shelter House in Saltillo says that the caravan story has already sparked more violence against migrants in the north.
Hemos recibido desde ayer y hoy hombres y mujeres golpeados.
Between yesterday and today, we have received men and women who have been beaten by immigration officials who were trying to detain them. They have bloody head wounds. This had not happened like this until the international incident of the President of the United States making claims that in Mexico there was no detention.
As for the migrants in the caravan further south, the Mexican government has given many of them 20- and 30-day permits to travel around the country without deportation. Against the backdrop of Mexico's presidential campaign, this has been a tense episode for officials. NPR's Carrie Kahn.
I do think that the spotlight that President Trump put on this group provoked the Mexican government to work as fast as they did, because to get these visas or these travel permits, 20 to 30-day permits, is very difficult. But they came to this big group of people and issued them within a day or two, which is amazing. I had met some people that had been in Tapachula, Chiapas, there at the border waiting for these permits for months, even years. We'll have to see how many of those people actually try to ask for asylum, whether those pictures and images of hundreds and hundreds of people walking has swayed public opinion in the United States or lawmakers' opinions. We'll have to see on the negative side of that.
This is a story spawned by an unfortunate headline and thoroughly misreported by Fox News, which famously has the president's ear. It's a textbook example of a case where facts were obscured by fantasy, where the usual is exaggerated beyond reckoning, putting the lives of people who are already terribly vulnerable at risk. It's the kind of thing we've become accustomed to. And that may be the scariest thing about it.
So that headline was pretty unfortunate on the BuzzFeed story. And the tragedy is that it's obscured the real here, which is, why are these people fleeing? What are the standards of life like there? What are they dealing with on a daily basis that is causing them to flee? And instead of meeting that with humanity or empathy, the president is using it, and Fox News is using it to fearmonger instead of, ask real questions about it.
Yeah. And we saw this Fox TV feedback loop again yesterday. Let's look at the examples of Fox talking about the GOP's effort to investigate the Obama-era DOJ, and then just 20 minutes later, the president tweeted not once but twice about that exact same subject. Is this any way to run a country?
We've seen it again and again, though, since Inauguration Day, where the president sees something on Fox News, he sees something on Hannity, he sees something on Jeanine Pirro or Fox and Friends, and then he turns it into what sounds like a policy proposal, and a lot of times becomes a policy proposal. So I don't think it's anything new, but I think it's a pretty clear pattern that has emerged over the last 15 months of this administration. Right. And if you said, is it any way to run a country? I don't believe so, and I don't think it's a very effective way to do it either, because people are very confused. There's been a lot of confusion about what exactly the president meant by sending the military to the border. You had Juliette Kayyem on the air here on CNN making the point, I think, giving him a lot of credit by saying that he was maybe confused and he meant the National Guard, which is what DHS has been talking about.
And which is ultimately what's happening.
Right.
You know, another thing that Trump and his Fox friends have in common, and I think your point's important, Jeff, it's not all of Fox News, it's about the pro-Trump commentators on Fox, is that those commentators love to blame Obama, just like the president loves to blame the former president. Should we be watching Fox now to find out if the president will order more missile strikes in Syria? Now that we have these more new horrible pictures of another chemical attack in Syria, I guess I find myself wondering if the president's just going to take Fox's advice.
It seems to me that if you want to know what the president's thinking is, you'd have to watch particularly Fox and Friends, because as you've demonstrated, as we've seen for, I guess, the whole administration, it's almost like a pass-through. And look, there are two questions about this.
Yeah.
One is, shock, revelation, this is a different kind of president than anything we've ever seen.
Right.
Most presidents, whatever their ideology, they might believe things, they might have a sense of what they believe, but they would not issue presidential-like proclamations, and that's what these tweets are, without checking. Donald Trump has this belief that if he thinks something is true, it is true. Whether it's millions of illegal immigrants voting 50 times a day in California, or the Muslims in Jersey City cheering the fall of the towers, you cannot move him by saying, no, excuse me, Mr. President, here are the facts.
But Jeff, doesn't that let people off the hook?
But he also
doesn't that let him off the hook to say, oh, yes, if he believes it, he believes it?
But the second point of that, first of all, you would think that the political process would have a rather harsh judgment about this kind of presidential thinking. That's a factor of the fact that the Republican base loves this guy, and the congressional Republican leaders use words like, troubling, I'm a little concerned about this. The second thing is, to the extent that Fox News is a journalistic enterprise, which it is at least part of the day, what baffles me is that the people in charge of Fox don't tell the Fox and Friends people, look, would you please make sure that what you're saying bears a remote resemblance to the facts.
But it's the highest rated morning show, is it not?
On
cable news, yeah. But to Jeff's point, I mean, also the president surprises his own staff most of the time with these presidential decrees by tweet. You'll be in the West Wing and a tweet will pop up or it'll come up on cable news and they express total shock like all of us do.
Yeah, to me, this spontaneous moment at Trump's speech on Thursday where he throws his papers up in the air, to me, it's a metaphor for his entire presidency, right? He's out there giving a speech about tax reform. Instead, he talks about voter fraud and immigration and other subjects.
But, Brian, this is Trump as a showman. He knows what gets the base going. Look, if you're at a Led Zeppelin reunion, you're going to want to hear Stairway to Heaven. That's it. And if you're a Trump supporter, you want to hear him bash immigrants.
Right.
I mean, that's just part of the drill. And he
But have we become
to
numb to his voter fraud lie by now?
I think two things. I think the base, as we can tell, and most of the Republicans in Congress have either shrugged their shoulders and said, that's Trump being Trump, like Manny Ramirez in Boston when he was a Red Sox. That's Trump being Trump. Is that a sensible response to this kind of reporting of flatly false information? Of course it isn't. But that's why we've just gone through the Passover season. This president is different from all other presidents. We know how to answer that question.
Right. It is notable to me that CNN and MSNBC didn't air any of that speech live. And Fox only showed about 10 minutes and then cut away. It does make me wonder if there's diminishing returns, if maybe the networks are going to treat these rants differently in the future. Anyway, Jeff, great to see you.